Good evening, night scholars. You've stepped into the hush of night chemistry, the quiet corner of the day where bright ideas dim to embers, and restless minds finally rest. Tonight we trace the flicker of a single spark, from a boy in snowy Stockholm tinkering with powder to a man whose name now crowns the world's most coveted peace prize. Alfred Nobel. Dynamite and peace. For the next hour and a half, let the crackle of a laboratory lamp replace the chatter of your thoughts. We'll glide across frozen Baltic waters to Imperial Russia, stand beside a raft-borne test site that shook a lake like thunder, and watch a final sunrise in San Remo where a last will rewrote history. Before we ignite that journey, give yourself 3 deep breaths with me. Into 3. Again. More. Feel the muscles around your eyes untense. Sense the bed beneath you like fresh snow underfoot. Keep breathing slowly as the story begins. When the mind wanders, follow the rhythm of the marimba back here, to the safe glow of this midnight laboratory. Ready? Let the first spark fly. Child of gunpowder and poetry. A brittle wind prowls the narrow lanes of Stockholm in the winter of 1838, its icy breath rattling shutters and whitening cobblestones. Inside a cramped timber workshop on Langholmsgatan, engineer Emmanuel Nobel hunches over brass cylinders and canisters of black powder, fingers stained with soot and saltpeter. Sparks leap from his soldering iron, tiny comets that vanish before they find the floor. Perched on a splintered crate nearby, 5-year-old Alfred Bernhard Nobel watches every movement with solemn concentration. His pockets are stuffed with crumpled paper. On one sheet, inked in shaky letters, is a 4-line poem about the moon glimmering on fresh snow. Here, beneath the mingled scents of pine shavings and gun oil, invention and imagination meet for the first time. Emmanuel's ideas are bold. Underwater mines to guard Sweden's coast, seawalls that breathe with the tide, but brilliance seldom keeps hunger at bay. After years of faltering contracts, creditors arrive like silent wolves. They haul away lathes, ledgers, even the family's cast-iron stove. While tools disappear into the night, Alfred's mother, Andriette Alsell Nobel, unlocks the modest storefront she has turned into a second-hand bookshop. By candlelight she sells ginger biscuits and worn volumes of Goethe and Voltaire to ferrymen and university students. Though coins are scarce, she slips stories into Alfred's hands each evening, teaching him that words can ignite without a spark and detonate softly within the mind. The winter of 1839 presses hard. Frost traces the window panes like silver veins, and breath hangs in the air even indoors. Emmanuel, convinced that opportunity lies abroad, departs for St. Petersburg, where he believes the Tsar's navy will value his inventions. Alfred, 3 brothers, and their mother remain in Stockholm, counting every stick of firewood. To kill the cold, the boy fills copybooks with riddles and sketches, drawing snowflakes as microscopic gears and imagining the force that might fuse poetry with powder. Early in 1842, a letter arrives from Russia, edges crisp with frost yet warm with promise. Emmanuel's mines have impressed the Admiralty. Funds and factory space await. In June, Andriette and her sons board the steamship Expressen across the Baltic. The deck pitches gently beneath their feet, and the Baltic spray freckles Alfred's face. He collects a pebble from each port, Stockholm granite, Åland limestone, Finnish gneiss, determined to remember every chapter of the journey he has not yet written. After 55 hours, the pastel palaces of St. Petersburg rise above filigreed bridges, shining beneath the midsummer sun. A clattering coach carries the family along Bolshaya Morskaya Street to a bustling factory where rows of experimental mines glint like enormous black seeds. Sparks fly from forges. Russian foremen call commands that Alfred cannot yet understand. He moves silently among them, counting rivets, valves, and fuses, composing silent stanzas in his head. Iron petals sleeping in brine. Will they bloom red or guard the line? Life in the imperial capital reshapes him quickly. Tutors discover the boy's appetite for languages. By 11 he speaks fluent French, by 12 English, by 13 German and Russian. Chemistry follows. Tables of acids and bases, the treachery of fulminates, the delicate dance of oxygen and nitrogen. Even so, his favorite exercise is translating Goethe into Swedish Alexandrines late at night, candles sputtering low while the Neva murmurs beyond frost-rimmed glass. One evening his mentor, the distinguished chemist Nikolai Zenin, presents a pale, quivering liquid called nitroglycerin. A single drop, struck with a hammer, snaps like summer lightning. Zenin whispers that the substance is unimaginably powerful yet impossibly unpredictable. Alfred's pulse quickens. The laboratory lamp seems suddenly too bright. He imagines chaining that chaos, giving it rhythm and meter the way a poet tames emotion with verse. Yet even amid marvel and discovery, homesickness lingers. In letters to his mother, Alfred confesses sleepless nights spent juggling words and formulas, struggling to decide whether he belongs to literature or to science. Emmanuel's business thrives on military contracts during the Crimean War, but the clamor of progress cannot drown the questions forming in Alfred's mind about the cost of invention. As the boy grows toward manhood, he walks St. Petersburg's quays alone at dusk, the smell of tar and river mist curling around him. He lists new words under the lamplight, shaping them into couplets, then seals them away beside sketches of detonators and conjectures about chemical stability. Each scrap of paper feels like a promise that one day he will reconcile the thunder of explosives with the hush of poetry. And so the seed is planted, deep in frozen Russian soil. A belief that volatile forces, whether linguistic or explosive, can be harnessed for human progress if only one can find the right casing. The next 2 decades will test that faith under pressures Alfred Nobel can scarcely imagine on these cobbled streets. Remember the images gathered along this first stretch of the journey. A timber workshop glowing amber against a Swedish night, a bookshop smelling of ginger and printer's ink, the rhythmic throb of a Baltic steamer heading east, the shimmer of nitroglycerin beneath a laboratory lamp. Hold them gently, as a collector might cradle rare minerals, and let their weight settle into memory. Our ship of story now drifts from childhood toward the iron ambition of youth. Ahead lie ice-bound canals, raft-borne experiments, and a liquid lightning that longs to be tamed. Prepare to follow Alfred across that fragile frontier. The river of time is already tugging us toward Block 2. Cross ice and iron. Spring of 1853 cracks open St. Petersburg's icebound canals. Burlap-wrapped anchors thunk onto wharves while steam whistles echo beneath Baroque cornices. In Emmanuel Nobel's factory yard carts arrive hourly, loaded with iron plates and copper wire. The Crimean War has begun, and the Tsar's Admiralty wants thousands of contact mines before summer. For 17-year-old Alfred, the city feels like a living forge. Sparks leap from rivet guns day and night, painting smudges of orange across the Neva's lingering snow. At dawn he drafts production tables in Swedish, Russian, and impeccably idiomatic French, then spends evenings hunched over poetry translations by lampglow. He walks home through a haze of coal smoke and sleet reciting Tennyson to himself, vowels clouding the air like phantom verses. Between chimney stacks and church domes he senses a single pattern pulsing, industry and imagination beating in ragged counterpoint, each daring the other to grow louder. The war accelerates every rhythm. Naval officers stomp through the workshop inspecting rows of gleaming spheres. Street gossip exaggerates British cannon range and French fleet size. Prices double overnight. Yet the Nobels prosper. Emmanuel installs a private test range on Kronstadt Island, and Alfred accompanies divers who lower prototype mines into lead-gray water. He times each explosion, notebook pressed to a damp greatcoat, counting the delay between spark and thunder. When a charge misfires, he feels the failure as a personal insult, as though rhyme has broken inside a sonnet. In late 1853, a visiting Italian chemist, stern, spectacled Ascanio Sobrero, lectures at the Academy of Sciences. He unwraps a dark bottle and confesses he wishes he had never created the liquid inside. One careless drop can vaporize a granite block. He calls it nitroglycerin. The audience murmurs, half skeptical, half enthralled. Alfred, perched in the gallery, feels his heart lurch. Here is force in its most poetic form. Invisible, instant, absolute. He corners Sobrero after the lecture, peppering him with questions about temperature thresholds, spontaneous decomposition, pressure waves. Sobrero warns him that even with ice baths and prayer, the substance obeys only chance. Alfred hears the warning, but also hears possibility, humming like a newly plucked violin string. War drags on. Hospital trains rattle through Finland station. Tales of fog-choked battlefields drift back from Crimea. In the quiet intervals, Alfred devours every paper on detonating agents he can find. His Russian tutor bets him a silver ruble he cannot master Italian in 6 months. He wins in 5, largely to read Sobrero's notes without translation. Friends begin joking that if Alfred forgets a word in one language, he simply coins it in another. By 1856, peace treaties are signed at Paris, and St. Petersburg exhales. Naval orders vanish, leaving warehouses stacked with unsold iron. Emmanuel's finances quiver again. Alfred, now 23, proposes expanding into civil engineering, tunneling powders for railways, blasting charges for harbor works. To understand European demand, he convinces his father to send him abroad on a study tour. With a leather valise, a sheaf of recommendation letters, and a vial of nitroglycerin sealed in lead tubing, he boards a train for Central Europe. He spends a season in Heidelberg, auditing Robert Bunsen's lectures on gas analysis and heat theory. Bunsen's lab is immaculate, glass stoppered neatly, floors swept after every experiment, and Alfred admires the discipline but notes its caution. In the cafes, he sketches alternative detonator designs on napkins, arguing with Prussian mining engineers about wave propagation in slate. Nights find him translating Schiller couplets, adjusting meter until meaning and music align. Paris follows. Théophile Jules Pelouse offers bench space in a cramped outbuilding that smells of ether and hot metal. Under Pelouse's supervision, Alfred distills nitroglycerin in 10 milliliter batches, fingers trembling not from fear but from anticipation. He rigs a brass manometer and discovers that a trace of sodium carbonate tempers the acid bite, giving precious seconds before violence. Each micro-improvement feels like coaxing a savage stanza toward elegance. One rainy afternoon, the glass retort fractures. A spray of amber droplets hits the stone floor. No spark, no catastrophic roar, just a slow sizzling hiss. Alfred sinks to his knees, breath caught somewhere between gratitude and disappointment. He notes the accident in his journal with the same clinical tone he reserves for reviewing sonnets. Structural weakness revealed, correction required. That night he dreams of a clay cylinder packed with damp powder, its fury sleeping, waiting for a poet's touch to wake it cleanly. Letters from Sweden grow urgent. Emil, Alfred's youngest brother, is experimenting with nitroglycerin on the family's country estate near Lake Mälaren. Local authorities have ordered the operation moved offshore to a wooden raft, a precaution that thrills Alfred and terrifies their mother. Emmanuel's shipyard contracts are dwindling. The family's future now seems tied to taming liquid lightning. Alfred races north through sleet and blooming lilac, crossing a Europe stitched together by new telegraph wires and fresh railway embankments. At each stop he posts packets of notes to himself. Equations, pressure curves, half-finished quatrains, fearful that any single notebook might be lost to theft or a careless porter. By the time he reaches Stockholm, the city's harbor smells of spring thaw and wet timber. The year is 1863, and every bell tower rings with promise. He visits Emil's floating laboratory at dawn. Fog drifts across the lake like unspooled silk. Wooden barrels of nitroglycerin sit in straw-lined cradles, bobbing gently with each wave. Emil's face is flushed with pride. He believes they stand on the brink of an industrial revolution. Alfred shares the exhilaration but also senses the precarious hush before a storm. He studies the raft's pine planks, thinking of how porous kieselguhr might absorb the liquid, how a blasting cap could deliver a precise whisper of flame. The poet inside him calculates cadence. Quiet, 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 then culmination. That evening, on the veranda of the family home, Alfred sketches a new concept. A paste-like explosive stable enough to ship by cart, powerful enough to carve tunnels through the Alps. He pauses to watch gulls wheel over the lake, their wings catching the last mulberry light. In the margin he writes a single line of verse. When thunder learns restraint, mountains shall step aside. The seed planted in St. Petersburg has now sprouted twin shoots, one of science, one of art, and both reach toward the same distant summit, mastery over forces that outsize ordinary human breath. Tomorrow the brothers will test fresh batches. Tomorrow Risk will stride across the water in hobnailed boots. But tonight the world hovers, weightless, between discovery and disaster. Hold that suspension a moment longer. The factory lights cooling in distant Russia, the damp Paris laboratory glinting with fractured glass, the raft rocking on Swedish dark water. In their tension lies the next turning point, the blast that will tear a hole in Alfred Nobel's heart even as it drives him closer to taming dynamite. Our story drifts toward that fragile dawn now, into Block 3, where thunder at last breaks its silence. Thunder on Lake Mälaren. Midsummer sunlight lingers almost all night above Stockholm, turning Lake Mälaren into a sheet of hammered copper. Every evening Alfred and his brother Emil row out to their floating laboratory, nothing more than a timber raft moored a few hundred meters from the family house at Helenborg. Barrels of nitroglycerin sway in straw-lined cradles, dully reflecting the red-gold sky. The brothers work in silence, broken only by the plash of oars and an occasional terse calculation. Each believes he can see a map of the future shimmering on the lake's surface, a world reshaped by controlled lightning. On the morning of September 3, 1864, the air hangs oddly still, as if the city itself has paused to listen. Alfred hunches over a ledger on shore, plotting a pressure curve for the next trial, while Emil and two assistants prepare a fresh batch out on the raft. From Alfred's desk the figures blur. The sunlight is too bright, the ink too pale. He rubs his eyes, glances toward the water, and the world erupts. A white flash, sharper than memory, cleaves the scene. Sound follows a heartbeat later, a concussive roar that folds houses inward and knocks pigeons from the church spire. Windows shatter across Sodermalm. Laundry whips from its lines. Alfred staggers into the garden as a column of smoke claws at the sky. Where the raft floated moments before, only shattered planks and burning pitch dance on the waves. He sprints down the jetty, shoes slapping wood, lungs clawing for air already fouled by acrid fumes. Boats streak toward the blast zone, but the water itself seems wounded, rippling with debris, dark with oil, eerily studded with silent drifting barrels. Fragments of Emil's notebooks, edges scorched, settle like grotesque snowflakes on the lake. By dusk the fireboats have doused every last ember, yet nothing resembling Emil is found. Authorities speak of vaporization, a clinical word that lands like a knife. The following dawn Alfred stands alone on the scorched jetty, windless and raw, staring into the water as if the lake might yet return his brother whole. He is 29, but grief ages him decades in a night. A single vow takes root. If nitroglycerin can snatch away a life in a single careless breath, he will force it to obey a measured pulse. 2 days later police inspectors cordon off Helenborg, and Parliament issues an immediate ban on nitroglycerin experiments within the city. Newspapers label Alfred the mad blast maker, whispering that divine judgment has fallen on the Nobel house. Suppliers retract credit. Workers drift away, crossing themselves when they pass the ruined shed. Still Alfred refuses to abandon the liquid that killed his brother. To abandon it would make the loss meaningless. In October he moves what remains of his equipment onto a leaky barge moored farther down the lake. Alone in a canvas tent he distills tiny vials of nitroglycerin, mixing them with every absorbent powder he can beg or borrow. plaster, cement dust, charcoal, even crumbs of toast. Most combinations seep or separate. Some still explode at a glance. At night he writes letters to his mother, careful, consoling sentences that hide the depth of his despair. After sealing each envelope, he opens a slim green notebook and covers page after page with rough Alexandrine lines, trying to paste grief into rhyme. Winter drags itself across Sweden. Ice locks the barge in place, moonlight pouring over snow-coated decks like unspooled silk. One freezing dawn, Alfred notices how the water-rich nitroglycerin beads harmlessly on the gritty surface of a sack accidentally ripped open. The grit is a soft, porous clay shipped north from Germany. Kieselguhr, worthless to most, miraculous to him. He dries the clay, crushes it fine, and folds the explosive into the powdery mass. The result is a damp, malleable putty that can be shaped with bare fingers, ignites only at the kiss of a fuse, and hurls a charge stronger than anything yet imagined. Alone beneath a slate-gray sky, he whispers a single word: dynamite. He wires a test charge under the thick lake ice. The detonation sends a bloom of crystal shards spiraling into the air, yet the shock feels contained, disciplined, almost surgical. The ice settles. The lake exhales a long sigh through its new, clean wound. Alfred tilts his head back and lets the flakes melt on his eyelashes like tears he can no longer afford to shed. By early spring he has drafted patent papers and refined a separate percussion cap, a tiny copper cylinder filled with fulminate that can rouse the sleeping paste with precise authority. Dynamite and detonator. 2 syllables poised to change the planet. Yet the world sees only the scar on Lake Melaren and the unmarked grave at its bottom. Investors flinch. Officials refuse export permits. Alfred's savings dwindle to the cost of lamp oil and black bread. One March evening, half-starved and wholly stubborn, he presents his invention to a panel of skeptical engineers in Stockholm's Royal Technical College. He describes tunnels through alpine granite, canals sliced across continents, harbors carved where no harbor could be. Members murmur that the substance is impressive, but the man who wields it is reckless, perhaps cursed. Alfred straightens his frayed cravat and replies in perfect, unflinching verse from Goethe, lines about harnessing Promethean fire for the good of humankind. Some scoff, but one gray-bearded mine owner requests a private demonstration. Days later, at a remote quarry, Alfred shapes a dozen sticks of his clay-like explosive, soft as new bread, and slips detonators into each. The charge shatters a granite face that had resisted picks for months, sending rock cascading in neat, controlled sheets. Dust settles. A startled silence swells into applause. The owner signs an order on the spot. 1,500 kilograms, delivered to Hamburg by midsummer. Credit loosens. Letters of inquiry arrive from France, from Italy, even from the United States. Alfred returns that night to the empty veranda overlooking the now calm lake. He lights a single lamp against the gloom and sets Emil's final, half-scorched notebook beside it. The pages splay like wings, brittle but intact enough that a few ink strokes, a torque calculation, an unfinished sketch, remain readable. Alfred lays one hand across the fragile paper and whispers that the work will carry both their names, whether the world wishes it or not. He has not triumphed. The ache of loss settles deeper each time the lake ripples in moonlight. But the explosive that stole his brother now bends to measured will. The poet in him records one spare couplet before sleep overtakes the lamp. Out of silence, thunder learned a calmer tongue. What it destroyed in fury, it will rebuild in stone. Beyond the veranda railing, Lake Melaren glitters under stars as sharp as needles. Somewhere below, scorched planks rest on the silt, mute witnesses to a promise newly forged. Disaster shall be repaid with invention, violence with a legacy of building. In the faint glow before dawn, the water seems to whisper a single word back: forward, and the story moves on toward Block 4. Stabilizing the storm. The first quarry order unlocks a floodgate. Within weeks, Alfred is field testing his malleable safety powder, from Norway's fjords to the slate mines of Saxony. Each new site feels like a stanza in an unfinished epic. Narrow valleys echoing with controlled thunder, black fumes dissolving into cool mountain air while startled workmen stare at their own hands, amazed to find them still attached. He travels with a battered leather case packed like a doctor's bag. Sticks of soft brown clay wrapped in waxed paper, coils of gutta-percha fuse, and a dozen tiny copper cylinders no longer than a child's thumb. Those cylinders are the quiet revolution inside the louder one. Months after Emil's death, Alfred had solved the final puzzle of reliability by filling each cap with a pinch of fulminate of mercury, then sealing it airtight with varnish. A single spark to the cap, a sharp pulse to the dynamite, and granite responds like parchment under a pen. Force acquires punctuation. In February 1865, he rents a disused paper mill on the forested banks of the Elbe near the village of Krummel. The locals eye the foreign chemist and his crates of clay with open suspicion. Some recall the newspaper stories from Stockholm and mutter prayers whenever he passes. Alfred answers misgiving with transparency. He invites the mayor, the parish priest, even the miller's teenage sons to witness every experiment. He kneads a stick between gloved fingers, tosses it lightly from one hand to the other, then sets it on an oak stump and strikes it with a wooden mallet. Nothing. Only when he slips in the copper cap and lays a cautious length of fuse does the hillside tremble. The crowd's collective flinch melts into laughter and cautious applause. Word spreads that the Swede's lightning can be tamed. Spring rains turn the Elbe brown and boisterous, yet inside the mill the air smells of warm resin and silica dust. Barrels of nitroglycerin arrive by barge at dawn, cold as cellar stone. Workers blend the liquid into kieselguhr with wooden paddles, press the paste through brass dies, and stack fresh sticks on pine racks to cure. Alfred walks the rows like a gardener inspecting seedlings, making constant, scribbled notes, diameter tolerances, wrap thickness, fuse burn rates. He dines on black bread and coffee gone cold, then returns to the floor until the bats flit through broken shutters. At night he lies awake in a narrow attic room furnished with nothing but a cot and a travel desk. Rain ticks on the roof like restless thoughts. He reviews patent clauses by lamplight, translating each into flawless French, German, English, and Swedish to secure priority in every major market. His handwriting, once elegant, has grown jagged from fatigue, yet he refuses to let clerks or lawyers phrase a single crucial sentence. If dynamite is misdescribed, the law might one day claim it belongs to someone else, and Emil's raft would have exploded for another man's fortune. July brings the first large-scale public demonstration. Representatives from Prussian railways, Belgian canal companies, and the newly formed Suez Canal Authority assemble on a limestone bluff above the river. Alfred paces the site with quiet intensity, measuring intervals with a pocket watch, adjusting fuse lengths with surgical scissors. A whistle shrills, the crowd retreats behind earthworks, and 5 charges buried in the cliffside detonate in perfect, even rhythm. Dust clears to reveal a neat shelf of stone ready for rails. Contracts are signed against the tailgate of a carriage before the echo has fully died, and by sunrise the telegraphs are chattering across Europe. A safer explosive has arrived, and its master is a gaunt Swede who quotes poetry while loading fuses. Money follows admiration, then scale follows money. Alfred forms Alfred Nobel and Company, raises new buildings at Krummel, and sketches a second plant for the Scottish Highlands where damp sea air will keep the nitroglycerin cool. He hires chemists from Bonn, machinists from Liège, and pays their passage himself. On paydays he slips envelopes onto bunkhouse tables after midnight, unwilling to celebrate wealth in front of men who risk their fingers for it. Yet accidents shadow progress. In September, a foreman mishandles a barrel during unloading. The concussion kills him and 2 bargemen. Alfred spends the night on the riverbank helping retrieve splintered planks, his boots sticky with resin and blood. At dawn he issues new protocols. Every worker must wear cork-soled shoes, no iron tools allowed near raw nitro, and each shift ends with a reading of the day's safety tally. Injury zero is spoken aloud like a prayer. He signs personal letters to the victims' families, enclosing 3 months' wages and a handwritten line from Schiller. Against stupidity, the gods themselves contend in vain. To some it sounds like apology, to others defiance. His own health phrase. Chronic headaches pulse behind the eyes. Fingertips tingle from constant contact with trace chemicals. He experiments on himself with doses of nitroglycerin dissolved in alcohol, noting its curious power to ease angina while making temples hammer like kettle drums. The paradox fascinates him. Pain, when properly measured, becomes remedy, a notion that feels almost theological. Success does not still the whisper of condemnation. Paris newspapers resurrect the epithet "merchant of death," pairing it with woodcuts of cannon blasted through fortress walls. Alfred responds with figures. Deaths in coal mines have fallen where dynamite replaces black powder. Tunnel projects finish months ahead of schedule. Canals save ships from storms by cutting straight through the land. Yet he knows arithmetic rarely softens fear. Late on solitary evenings he drafts prefaces for a collected book of poems he keeps postponing, wondering if verse might accomplish what ledgers cannot. On a raw November day in 1867, he receives word that the French patent has been granted. Brevet number 78,132. He allows himself 1 hour of celebration, walking alone along the Elbe as barges glide under sullen skies. Each ripple in the river looks like a line of text erased the instant it is written. He thinks of Emile, of the raft's vanished boards, of how grief and invention have knotted into a single rope dragging him forward. He recites aloud the promise he once whispered to the lake. Thunder will rebuild what fury destroyed. The wind carries the words downstream. For the first time in months he feels almost rested. Night settles early, thick with the smell of wet pine. In the mill windows, lanterns glow like captive suns. Inside, rows of dynamite sticks lie ready to travel by rail and sea to projects Alfred will never see completed. Mountain passes in the Andes, river gorges in Bengal, granite chasms in Nevada. Each stick bears his surname pressed into the wrapper, yet he senses they also bear another inscription, invisible but indelible: Emile. He touches the warehouse doorframe in silent benediction and climbs the attic stairs to sleep. Tomorrow will bring new negotiations, perhaps new calamities, but tonight the factory rests under a quilt of fog, and the Elbe mutters softly against its banks. Somewhere in the distance a lone church bell marks the hour. Alfred listens, counts the strokes, and allows the final echo to slip into the quiet, carrying with it the faintest hope that discipline can coexist with power, and that the path from invention to integrity has not yet closed. Factories and restlessness. Rails hiss past the Crummel plant at dawn, carrying the first crates stamped Dynamite Nobel toward iron bridges in Bohemia and canal cuts on the Rhone. Within 2 years similar trains depart from new works outside Glasgow, Turin, Stockholm, Bergen, Lyon and Pittsburgh. Alfred seems to appear in all of them at once. Lean, dark-coated, hat brim pulled low, clutching a leather portfolio that smells of lampblack and travel dust. Station masters memorize his timetable better than their own. Each factory is built to a single blueprint. Brick drying sheds set far apart like cautious neighbors, nitroglycerin houses sunk behind earthen berms, a lone bell to warn of leaks or rising fumes. He is meticulous to the point of obsession. If a roof plank warps, he has the entire section relayed. If a ledger entry wavers from neat columns, the clerk copies the page again. Workers learn that the quiet Swede can recite casualty figures for every major mine explosion of the decade, and will lecture on the moral cost of sloppy routine until even hardened foremen stare at their boots. Contracts multiply faster than chimneys. Dynamite bores the St. Gothard Tunnel through alpine granite 5 years ahead of schedule and at half the expected loss of life. In Panama, French surveying teams blast channels through mosquito-infested swamps where shovels would sink and drown. On the American frontier, crews clear 1,000 miles of transcontinental track with crates bearing his embossed signature. Newspaper illustrators draw him as a modern Vulcan, forging continents together in a storm of flying rock. Success, however, sharpens rather than soothes his nerves. In hotel rooms overlooking unfamiliar rivers, he paces until morning, reciting Goethe under his breath while jotting trial detonator mixes on hotel stationery. He keeps a sealed vial of nitroglycerin in his breast pocket. Less superstition than reminder, he claims. The force that made his fortune is only ever one cracked glass away from ending it. At night he straps a revolver beside the bed, plagued by rumors of extortionists and by his own drifting thoughts, which prove harder to silence. Letters to his mother Andriette arrive weekly, pages crowded with precise handwriting and the scent of bitter almond ink he favors. He tells her of quarries made safer, of miners singing as they drill, of royalties banked in Paris, but the lines between swell with unspoken fatigue. She replies in gentle Swedish, urging him to eat more, to rest. He slips her notes into his pocket and carries them to board meetings like charms against the hollow ache behind his ribs. In 1873, he purchases a small chateau at Sèvres outside Paris and installs a private laboratory in the orangery. Glass coils snake across mahogany benches. Steel pressure vessels squat on tiled floors like watchful toads. Here he chases new formulas. Gelignite, blasting gel, nationless, odorless propellants that burn without smoke. He patents each discovery in overlapping networks, convinced that legal armor must be thicker than brickwork. Yet even surrounded by patents, he feels exposed. His notebooks grow crowded with metaphors of sieges and sluice gates, of hearts that leak like faulty gaskets. One January night, the Sèvres lab shudders with an explosion small by his standards, yet loud enough to rattle chandeliers in the dining room. Servants rush in with buckets, but Alfred is already beating out sparks with a wool coat, spectacles fogged, hair singed at the fringe. He notes the pressure spike, scrawls operator error, mine, and orders new ventilation fans by dawn. When he travels, he carries a locked steel box filled with tightly rolled poems, some in Swedish elegiac couplets, others in clipped English quatrains, most unfinished. He never shows them, yet reads and edits compulsively on steamships, in Pullman cars beneath flickering gas lamps. The verses circle familiar themes: restrained power, lonely compromise, the sound of water slapping cedar planks on a lake that no longer holds his brother's name. By 1883 his network spans 90 plants on 5 continents, but each telegram announcing another license brings a fresh spike of insomnia. He presides over boardrooms in Vienna, then rises at 3 a.m. to walk deserted streets until sunrise, measuring steps, counting heartbeats, timing the echo between heel and pavement like seconds between charge and blast. Doctors prescribe laudanum. He tests nitroglycerin in minute doses instead, intrigued by its curious power to dilate vessels and quiet angina even as it sets temples throbbing. Pain, he notes, is force seeking an exit. Give it a safer channel. Accidents still occur, rare but brutal. In Wales, an overheated carriage ignites at a siding. 6 men die. Alfred boards the first train, stands beside charred rails and sleet, and empties a full notebook into the mud recording chain of fault. He pays double indemnities, funds a widow's trust, installs ice-cooled storage in every plant, and writes a terse circular. If a single stick travels warm, treat it as a live complaint from the dead. The phrase is quoted in trade journals, half admiration, half reproach. Pay scorches on. He dines with railway barons in Berlin at noon, tests detonators under the Arctic sun of Vardo by midnight. Pocket watches blur in his mind. He calculates local time by the taste of the air. Coal soot for the Midlands, iodine tang for the Baltic, hot dust for the Isthmus of Corinth. In brief calm intervals he tilts back in carriage seats, eyes closed, reciting one line over and over. All light is borrowed, we pay in shadow. Profit tallies swell, but solitude gathers interest of its own. He converses most easily with foremen, chemists, artillery officers, people who understand that every miracle hides conditions in small print. An invitation to a Paris salon ends with him staring at velvet drapes, wishing for the slam of a mine cart. Yet ideas keep arriving, urgent as telegrams. Smokeless propellant, synthetic rubber, artificial silk. Each flares in his imagination like sparks off the soldering iron of childhood. Late in 1884, exhausted and mildly feverish, he boards a night train from Zurich to Paris carrying drafts of a new patent for ballistite, a gunpowder without smoke or residue. The carriage lamp swings in the alpine dark. The rhythmic clack of wheels merges with the pulse in his temples. He dreams of a library where every book displays two titles, one in ink, one in flame. When he wakes, the window glass shows only his own reflection, pale and hollow-eyed, superimposed on dawn-pink peaks. He whispers the old promise to that ghost in the glass. Fire shall build, not burn. Thunder shall carve, not crush. Near Paris, factory chimneys punctuate the horizon like black exclamation marks. Somewhere beyond them, newspapers are already debating whether dynamite shortens wars or merely sharpens their teeth. Alfred folds his coat tighter, aware that the next debate will not be technical but moral, and that his name is barreling toward judgments he has only half imagined. The train whistles. Fields blur into suburbs, suburbs into soot-rimmed walls. He taps his chest pocket, feels the reassuring chill of the sealed vial against his heart, and decides, somewhere between two pulses, that the work must speak before any verdict is passed. He opens a fresh page in his notebook and drafts a letter to himself. The argument from utility fails unless paired with one from conscience. Outside, the engine brakes hiss like distant surf, and the city of light slides into view, waiting to test whether a man of dynamite can ever sleep in peace. The Merchant of Death. A pale winter sky hangs over Cannes in 1887, the Mediterranean unusually still, as though the sea itself is eavesdropping on the gossip of hotel verandas. Alfred Nobel arrives for a rare respite, hoping the sea air will loosen the iron bands around his chest. The morning porter greets him with a hesitant smile, then thrusts a crinkled newspaper forward. La Gazette de Nice, hot off the press. On the front page, a thick ink headline shouts, Le Marchand de la Mort est mort. The Merchant of Death is dead. He reads on, heart-thudding. Dr. Alfred Nobel, who made his fortune by finding ways to kill more people faster than ever before, died yesterday. The words blur. He sets the paper on a wicker table, notes how the wind catches the corners but cannot lift the gilt now anchoring him in place. Only hours later does a telegram from Paris correct the error. It is Ludwig Nobel, Alfred's elder brother, who has died. Yet the article remains, a premature epitaph that leaves no room for footnotes or self-defense. That night he walks the lamplit Promenade de la Croisette until dawn, coat pulled tight, repeating the headline like a catechism he cannot recite without flinching. The accusation follows each footstep. Merchant of Death. He has always argued that dynamite shortens labor and shrinks war fronts, that roads and railways built with it save years of human toil. The editorial pierces that reasoning as neatly as a detonator pin pierces waxed paper. Back in Paris, questions echo louder than factory whistles. Can an invention be separated from its worst uses? Can a name be separated from its most convenient verdict? To find answers he invites journalists, philosophers, and social reformers to Severn, offering tours of spotless labs and accident ledgers that show falling casualty rates. Few accept. Most prefer the tidy narrative printed in nice. Reputation travels faster than any express train he has ever boarded. In the middle of this turbulence, a letter arrives from Vienna. Warm, direct, signed Bertha von Suttner. Years earlier she had worked briefly as his secretary, delighting him with razor-sharp wit before marrying a baron and devoting her life to the peace movement. Now she congratulates him on his latest smokeless powder patent, but mostly she chastises. If you truly believe progress should serve humanity, why let the loudest voices be those who fire the guns? Her words land like measured charges, opening fissures he can peer into without fear of collapse. Correspondence ignites into friendship, friendship into challenge. Bertha writes of disarmament conferences, of pamphlets circulated in cafes, of armies swelling beyond anything Europe has seen since 1815. Alfred replies with figures and cautions. Deterrence is also peace, yet her certainty unsettles him. One winter afternoon he rereads a paragraph until the ink seems to vibrate. Your discoveries outstrip our moral stamina. You possess the lever that could move the world toward either judgment or mercy. Which will you choose? He chooses conversation. In spring 1889 she visits Paris, her hat festooned with lilac ribbons, her eyes bright with conviction. They stroll the Seine embankment among bookstalls that smell of damp paper and crushed chestnut blossoms. She speaks of a League of Nations, of arbitration courts without swords at their backs. Alfred listens, nodding, then admits that he cannot unmake dynamite, cannot recall the patents spreading like mycelium through industry and arsenals alike. But perhaps, he muses, one might invest in the opposite of destruction. A fund large enough to dwarf the profits of war, awarded to those who push civilization forward. Bertha seizes on the idea as though it were already printed on parchment. Recognition breeds imitation. Honor the builders, and the breakers will look suddenly small. Alfred carries that sentence home, turning it over like a smooth river stone while the city outside mocks with placards offering poudre sans fumée to every arms supplier west of the Rhine. His health deteriorates. Flashes of angina, bouts of migraine that leave him curled on the floor of the Severin Library. During sleepless nights he drafts possible prize categories on the backs of invoices. Physics, chemistry, medicine, literature, and a final line he struggles to name. Peace feels too fragile, humanity too vague, fraternity too French. The page remains blank, as though language itself hesitates before such an ambition. Meanwhile, he can no longer ignore public reckoning. German satirists publish caricatures of him straddling the globe, stuffing coins into cannon mouths. British columns debate whether dynamite will render navies obsolete or simply more terrible. Stockholders urge him to adopt a lower profile, but retreat has never been his method. He starts speaking at engineering societies, not about profit but about responsibility, quoting Blaise Pascal on the necessity of doubt. Reporters scoff, self-flagellation as publicity stunt, but some younger chemists listen in stunned silence, hearing in his tremulous voice the first hint that science cannot stand apart from its consequences. On a humid July evening in 1891, thunder rolls over Paris without a drop of rain. Alfred sits at his escritoire, candle guttering, and copies a single sentence from his experiment notes into a leather journal reserved for poetry. The greatest charge is not that which shatters rock, but that which shifts conscience. He sets down the pen, closes cramped eyelids, and imagines a hall filled with scholars and dreamers, medals glinting like small suns while outside cannons rust for lack of relevance. The vision is fragile, easily mocked, but in that moment it feels heavier than any crate of explosives he has ever shipped. Months later he buys a townhouse on Paris's Avenue Malakoff and installs a circular safe in his bedroom floor. Into it he places a sealed envelope marked "Will." The text is skeletal, only a preamble and a sketch of instructions for an international prize funded by the bulk of his estate. No executor's name, no bank details, just an outline, yet powerful enough that he sleeps a full night afterward for the first time in years. Still, the world beyond that safe marches toward louder arsenals. France lengthens its artillery barrels. Germany experiments with high-velocity shells. Britain lays keels for dreadnoughts embryonic. Bertha writes again, furious and fearless. If we do not pay dreamers in gold, we will pay soldiers in blood. Alfred pins the letter above his desk, a talisman and a warning. By 1893, a cough that began in damp hotel corridors has become a persistent companion. Doctors prescribe seaside rest, but he boards trains instead. Berlin for ballastite lawsuits, Milan for patent signings, Vienna for a symposium on medical uses of nitroglycerin. In each city, he slips away from banquets to draft clauses expanding the still-secret prize plan. The blank line finally receives its title: Prize for the work or movement that best advances fraternity between nations, reduction of standing armies, and promotion of peace congresses. Writing the word peace, he feels the pen hesitate, as if crossing an invisible frontier. Returning to Paris after one such journey, he passes a news vendor selling a special broadsheet about naval budgets. The vendor recognizes him, half bows, then says softly, "Monsieur Nobel, will your next invention end war entirely?" Alfred pauses, surprised into honesty. Perhaps inventions have done enough. It is time for intentions. He drops a franc on the counter, walks on before the man can reply, the Mediterranean wind of can echoing in his memory like a question that must never be misanswered again. Night folds over the boulevard, sweeping wagon wheels and distant cafe music into hush. In the townhouse study, the safe waits beneath parquet boards. Alfred kneels, turns the heavy key, and slips the newest will draft beside the first. 2 documents now. One outlining fortune, the other perhaps penance. He closes the lid, listens for the soft click, and allows himself a thin, weary smile. No wider than the seam of an envelope, yet large enough to contain the hope that a reputation can be rewritten, not by erasing the past but by detonating a future no headline could have predicted. Last experiments in Paris. Fog curls down Avenue Malakoff like cooling smoke from a spent fuse, muffling hooves and carriage wheels. Inside his townhouse laboratory, Alfred Nobel works beneath the orange flicker of gas lamps, a shawl over his shoulders, breath feathering in the chill. Rows of retorts bubble with amber syrup destined to become artificial rubber. A smaller bench hosts silkworm cocoons not spun by insects but coaxed from nitrocellulose. The soft hiss of burners merges with a rasping cough. He tries to silence against a linen handkerchief already stained with iodine. Illness has thinned him, yet every pocket still bulges with notebooks. He paces in slippered feet from table to table, timing reactions, jotting pressures, whispering couplets under his breath as if rhyme might keep rhythm in failing lungs. Visitors see only the collapse, sunken cheeks, a tremor in the left hand. He feels instead a strange clarifying energy, as though the body's retreat concentrates the mind into a single relentless point. Word of his ballastite patent victory over the French government arrives by courier one damp March morning. The document still smells of ministerial sealing wax when he flips it shut. Success tastes thin these days. Each court win only reminds him that smokeless powder will thunder louder than the brown clouds it replaces. He turns back to the beakers, chemical silk draped across a glass rod, glistening like moonlit spider thread, and thinks how quiet such shimmer is compared with artillery. On Sundays he rides a black phaeton to Bois de Boulogne, windows down even in rain, hoping the rush of horse and wind will loosen the tight band around his ribs. The avenue smells of crushed acorns and damp wool coats. Couples in cafe terraces glance up, recognizing the bearded silhouette, sometimes pointing, sometimes turning away. Headlines still stitch his name to crises. A train robbery in Oklahoma using stolen dynamite, naval tests in Wilhelmshaven where ballastite shells punch holes through iron plating. He answers none of it now. Instead he copies Bertha von Suttner's latest pamphlet into a scrapbook and writes below it in pencil, proof that words can be more explosive than deeds. Summer presses hot against the shutters. Laboratory windows remain shut despite the heat. A stray ember could turn solvents into funeral pyres. Alfred's doctor begs him to rest by the sea. He defers, bargaining for one more synthesis. His assistants watch with mixed awe and dread as he distills nitroglycerin in volumes he once condemned as reckless, but now handles with the calm of a man measuring out his own remaining days. One evening an Erlenmeyer flask fractures in silence. Hairline cracks spraying drops across a slate countertop. No detonation follows. He has iced the solution to near freezing, but the sight of trembling beads brings sweat to every brow in the room except his. He lifts a shard with tweezers, studies the crystalline film, and smiles faintly. Even danger tires with age, he mutters, then orders the lab cleared for the night. Autumn's first frost silvers the boulevards when Alfred accepts an invitation to deliver a lecture at the Swedish-Norwegian club on Rue Rivoli. Friends expect a technical talk. He surprises them with reflections on responsibility. How science grows teeth the moment profit rewards the bite. How ethics can lag behind invention until catastrophe drags them level. Some applaud, some exchange wary looks. Afterward, in the club's oak-paneled reading room, he asks for writing paper and a glass of mineral water. The steward brings both. Alfred dismisses him with a smile that looks almost peaceful. He writes swiftly, scarcely pausing except to cough. 4 dense pages in French, then Swedish duplicates. A final testament. 94% of his vast estate is to be placed in a fund. The interest each year will reward those whose work brings the greatest benefit to humankind. Physicists, chemists, medical researchers, writers, and, most pointedly, champions of peace. He specifies that nationality shall hold no weight, nor even the inventor's opinion of the committee's decisions. Merit alone, judged by experts, will decide. When the ink is dry, he folds the sheets, seals them with dark green wax, and signs the flap with a plain A. Nobel. The wax impression bears no crest, only the gentle swirl of a thumbprint. He hands the envelope to Ragnar Solman, a young engineer who once saved a dynamite shipment from a dockside fire in Hamburg. Guard this as you would a blasting cap, Alfred says. It looks inert, but one day it will move mountains. Later that night he sits at his escritoire gazing over rooftops toward the dim halo where the Eiffel Tower pierces clouds. In the distance, a lone locomotive whistle echoes across the Seine, soft as a lullaby. He thinks of Emile, of Bertha's unflinching eyes, of a Ken headline pronouncing him dead before his heart had surrendered. He whispers a line of verse never published. Let the final echo be gentler than the first report. November storms drum against the glass. Each morning Alfred's valet finds him asleep in the lab, head on folded arms beside softly ticking apparatus. He dreams of tunnels spiraling through mountain hearts, of doctors easing pain with tiny drops of heart medicine nitro, of prize medals gleaming like small suns over assembly halls. In the dream the applause is muffled, distant, as though he listens through snow. Yet it is enough. At month's end he agrees, at last, to leave Paris for winter warmth. Bags are packed for San Remo. Vials are crated, notebooks sorted. Before stepping into the carriage, he casts one final look back at the orangery windows, glowing amber in the gray dawn. Inside those walls formulas still simmer, but his hands no longer itch to adjust them. He presses a palm against his coat, feeling the starched edge of the safe deposit receipt, feeling his heartbeat steady beneath, and turns toward the waiting sea. San Remo sunrise. The Ligurian coast greets Alfred Nobel with a hush that feels almost medicinal. December light slants through olive groves, painting stone terraces in pale gold. His hired carriage winds upward toward the ochre walls of Villa Clois, wheels crunching over fallen cypress needles. Each breath carries the medicinal tang of sea salt and rosemary, strong enough, he hopes, to rinse away the Parisian fumes still trapped in his lungs. Inside, rooms are sparsely furnished. A walnut writing desk, a narrow cot facing a balcony, and crates of laboratory glass the servants never unpack. Alfred stands at the window, hands clasped behind his back, scanning the gulf for merchant vessels. None appear. Only gulls wheel over water darkening from jade to indigo. For a moment he imagines those birds bearing away the last loose threads of his unfinished experiments, letting them drift harmlessly into the horizon. The villa's caretaker, Signor Coligny, serves thin broth and insists upon a shawl for the guest's shoulders. Alfred obliges, though the knitted wool scratches and he still smells ether on his cuffs. Each evening he writes until the stub of a candle gutters. Notes on artificial silk, improvements to blasting gelatin, even the outline of a book of poems he knows he will never assemble. He signs letters to chemists in St. Petersburg and Turin with brisk directives, sealing them with a wafer of green wax whose imprint has faded almost smooth from use. As days pass, correspondence slows, replaced by long silences broken only by the metronome of waves. The valet finds Alfred at dawn on the balcony, gaze fixed on the line where sea meets sky. "It is not a horizon," he murmurs once, "but a ledger, credits for what we build, debits for what we break." He does not elaborate. The man nods respectfully and retreats. Pain arrives like an old creditor, at first a polite cough, then a tightening band across the chest that bends him double. He refuses to summon a doctor until a fit leaves blood on his handkerchief. When the physician comes, small, solemn, with a mustache like a parenthesis, Alfred listens to the verdict without blinking. Heart disease, complicated by years of inhaled fumes and sleepless travel. Prescribed rest becomes command. All chemicals are to remain crated. All letters dictated from bed. Night folds over the villa, but sleep remains a stranger. He asks Coligny to read aloud from Dante in the Tuscan original. The cadence reminds him of rolling detonations in mountain tunnels, booming tercets driving through rock, and he drifts into shallow dozes where snowflakes fall on Lake Melerin, melt, then reform into metals bright as morning suns. On December 9th he dictates a final addendum, a modest annuity for his servants, for loyalty demonstrated beyond wages. Then, almost as an afterthought, he asks that certain notebooks be burned unopened, particularly the one labeled Synthesis K. Coligny, startled, promises to obey. Alfred nods, closes his eyes, and whispers that an idea unfinished is less dangerous than one misused. The night is restless. Shutters rattle in a mistral wind. Shortly after 2, the valet hears a soft thump and finds Alfred half sitting on the floor, one hand braced against the walnut desk. Breath escapes in ragged syllables of Swedish unseen on any patent. They lift him gently back to bed, but the pulse falters like a fuse sputtering in damp sand. He asks for ink and pen. None can be found quickly enough. Instead, he presses Coligny's wrist and mouths a single Swedish word. Fardig, finished. At dawn, the first sunlight of December 10, 1896 pours through lace curtains, crosses a row of unpacked glass retorts, and settles on the still figure beneath the shawl. Sea wind edges into the room, carrying scents of brine and flowering myrtle. Far below, church bells toll for an ordinary feast day of a lesser saint, but in Villa Clois they mark the quiet cessation of a man whose life was anything but ordinary. Coligny telegraphs Ragnar Solman in Paris. Before the day ends, storms of speculation break across Europe. Fortunes, lawsuits, rumors of hidden formulas. Yet for the moment the villa remains calm, a stone shell holding nothing louder than the rhythmic hush of surf. On the desk lie 2 envelopes addressed in a firm, slanted hand, one to Bertha von Suttner, the other to no one at all, sealed but unmarked, the wax still soft. Outside, the sea keeps strict impartial time, wave after wave, like careful ledger lines extending beyond any mortal account. Prizes for a better tomorrow. Snow drifts across Stockholm on December 30, 1896, as Ragnar Solman and Rudolf Liljequist step through the heavy doors of the Swedish-Norwegian club. In their gloved hands they carry Alfred Nobel's newly arrived belongings, a leather diary, a dented pocket chronometer, and the sealed will he pressed into Solman's care. Inside the boardroom, relatives sit rigid beneath oil portraits, their grief already curdling into apprehension. When the notary breaks the wax and begins to read, the words fall like clean detonations. The whole of my remaining realizable estate shall constitute a fund, the interest on which shall be annually distributed in prizes. 5 categories: physics, chemistry, medicine, literature, peace, each to reward those who have conferred the greatest benefit to mankind. No mention of heirs, no portion set aside for family enterprises. A stunned silence follows, broken only when one cousin rises, face flushed, and declares the bequest impossible, an affront to blood and nation alike. Yet the will is precise, its legal armor forged with the same rigor Alfred once applied to detonator caps. Contest it, and they risk blowing apart their own share of what little remains outside the fund. The meeting ends with chair legs scraping like drawn breath. Outside, sleigh bells jingle past the curtained windows, oblivious to the history just set in motion. Implementation proves anything but simple. Taxes tug at the estate from 3 countries: Sweden, Norway, France, each citing domicile and duty. Executors crisscross borders by train, arguing clauses, inventorying patents, selling factories whose brick walls still hum with latent thunder. They liquidate shares, convert royalties to gold, and funnel the proceeds into a fledgling foundation. Newspapers that once labeled Nobel a merchant of death now hail his final gesture as a monument to conscience. Others deride it as belated self-absolution. Solman, exhausted and resolute, writes in his journal that the argument no longer matters. The deed is signed. What counts now is endurance. Endurance wins. By spring 1900, the Nobel Foundation is legally recognized. Its charter ink barely dry before nominations flood in from universities and learned societies across the globe. Committees convene in high-ceilinged rooms smelling of pine resin and lamp oil, sifting achievements that span the visible and the invisible. X-rays revealing hidden bones, laws of chemical affinity binding atoms in unseen dance, antitoxins coaxed from the blood of horses to spare children the choke of diphtheria. Debates stretch past midnight. Votes are tallied in whispers. Outside, the Baltic ice thaws, rivers break free, and telegraph wires crackle with anticipation. On December 10, 1901, the 5th anniversary of Alfred's death, the Grand Hall of the Royal Swedish Academy of Sciences fills with candlelight and low murmurs. Laureates sit in the front row, nerves taut as bowstrings. Wilhelm Röntgen accepts the first physics prize, raising the heavy gold medal high enough for its glint to reach the balcony. Jacobus Henricus van 't Hoff follows for chemistry, then Emil von Behring for medicine. The literature laureate, Sully Prudhomme, bows with the shy gravity of a man accustomed to smaller stages. At the peace ceremony in Oslo, Henri Dunant and Frederick Passy share the inaugural honor, one for rescuing wounded soldiers at Solferino, the other for waging relentless campaigns of words against war. In Stockholm, a hush settles when King Oscar II steps forward to close the celebration. He speaks of science harnessed for healing, of letters that refine the soul, of peace that must be cultivated like a rare orchid. For a moment the air seems to tremble with something weightless yet immense. Possibility, perhaps, or the collective exhale of a century poised on the brink of transformations Alfred Nobel could only imagine. Far from the chandeliers, Villa Clois lies quiet beneath Mediterranean stars. The balcony door stands ajar, letting in a salt breeze that riffles the pages of an unburned notebook left on the writing desk. Its final entry, a single line, is dated 2 days before Nobel's death. May the distant echoes of my work resolve at last into harmony. No one is present to read it, yet across 2 capitals his wish begins to materialize. Tiny ripples spreading through laboratories, libraries, and negotiating halls. Years will pass, wars will come, and critics will question whether prizes can outshine artillery. But on this December night, the ledger Alfred envisioned balances, if only briefly. Thunder has learned a gentler tongue. The coins once minted from dynamite now gild medallions pressed into the palms of those who build rather than break, heal rather than wound, write rather than roar. And somewhere beyond applauding halls and moonlit waves, the quiet mind that conceived both cataclysm and concord finds, at last, its equilibrium. Legacy in motion. Long after Alfred Nobel's last heartbeat faded beneath the San Remo sun, his inventions kept echoing through the stone, steel, and synapses of a new century. Dynamite was first to speak. With its disciplined thunder, engineers carved the Panama Canal, stitching two oceans together and redrawing the map of trade. Farther north, the same malleable sticks bit into Black Canyon granite so the Hoover Dam could rise, taming the Colorado River and lighting cities that glittered like constellations across the desert. Each blast was a syllable in an expanding industrial language, one that spelled railways through the Hindu Kush, subway tunnels beneath the Seine, and mine shafts that sank deeper than daylight. Yet the legacy was never only concrete and commerce. Controlled explosions became a scientific probe, a percussion hammer tapping Earth's hidden chambers. Geophysicists set charges in remote valleys, listening to the returning shock waves until mountain roots and mantle plumes revealed themselves like photographs developing in a darkroom. Those seismic experiments, descendants of Nobel's first raft-borne trials, helped draft the modern atlas of tectonic plates and, decades later, guided the placement of early warning sensors safeguarding millions from quake and tsunami. Medicine, too, claimed its share of the blast. The angina remedy Alfred once tested on his own racing heart evolved into precise nitroglycerin tablets and sprays, opening constricted vessels in operating rooms from Kiev to Kyoto. Pharmacologists studying its pathways uncovered the crucial role of nitric oxide, igniting a cascade of discoveries in cardiovascular science and earning yet another Nobel Prize, proof that an explosive rearranged for gentler purpose could lengthen lives it might once have ended. Even where Nobel's direct patents fell away, their DNA threaded forward. TNT, and RDX. All modern explosives borrow principles his detonator caps first solved: uniform grain, shock initiation, timed charge. With them, miners harvested the rare earth metals that fed 20th century electronics, and rocketry pioneers shaped the test stands where liquid propellants thundered toward the moon. In the 1960s, when engineers bored the tunnels for the CERN synchrocyclotron and later the Large Hadron Collider, they still relied on controlled blasts tuned with algorithms unimaginable in Alfred's day yet answering the same fundamental question: how to ask stone to step aside without bringing the mountain down. Meanwhile, the Nobel Prizes themselves grew into a metronome for global curiosity. Curie's radium, Einstein's photoelectric spark, Watson and Crick's double helix, Goodall's field notebooks, Nakamura's blue LED, Doudna and Charpentier's genome scissors. Each laureate drew power not from dynamite, but from the endowment it made possible. In laboratories lit by those funds, lasers cooled atoms to fractions above absolute zero, radio telescopes mapped the afterglow of the Big Bang, and mathematicians framed the algorithms that now thread data through fiber-optic nerves across the planet. Year after year, the Stockholm ceremony renewed Alfred's quiet wager that recognition could accelerate discovery faster than profit or rivalry alone. The echo carried into diplomacy. Peace Prize medals hung over negotiations that ended wars in Vietnam, Northern Ireland, Colombia. Not every ceasefire held, but the prize turned attention toward those who tried, reminding statesmen that moral engineering, like blasting, demands both precision and nerve. Entering the 21st century, dynamite found subtler stages. Microblasting made room for neutrino observatories buried beneath kilometers of rock, where strings of sensors now wait for whispers from supernovae. In Greenland and Antarctica, controlled charges profile ice sheets, guiding models of climate futures. Renewable energy firms fracture bedrock for geothermal wells, using shock waves calibrated by software and seismology descended from that first raft on Lake Mälaren. Even planetary scientists adapt the logic. NASA's DART mission nudged an asteroid with kinetic impact, citing Nobel's principle that a small, well-timed force can redirect a world of momentum. The moral questions Alfred faced have not gone silent. Illicit blasting scars rainforest hills for hidden gold. Munitions evolve with chilling elegance. Critics still weigh the laureate's golden medals against the iron shell casings littering battlefields. Yet alongside those shadows stand the cathedrals of science, medicine, and engineering his ideas made reachable. They rise in skyline arcs and in the invisible frameworks of knowledge. Proof that thunder, when disciplined, can build more than it breaks. In classrooms from Sydney to Santiago, students watching archive footage of the Hoover spillways learn that every surge of current in their laptops traces back through turbine blades to a labyrinth first opened by dynamite. Cardiologists adjusting microdoses of nitroglycerin recall that the pill began as a perilous drop quivering in a glass vial. Researchers waiting for a midnight neutrino ping know their underground caverns exist because someone once asked stone to yield, grain by grain without collapse. And each December, when laureates file beneath Stockholm's chandeliers or Oslo's vaulted ceiling, a quiet counterpoint hums beneath the applause. Alfred Nobel's heart, long stilled, still funds the frontier. In the rustle of citation scrolls and the soft clink of medals against velvet, the old promise resounds. That force, fused with conscience, can propel humanity outward and upward, one measured detonation, one audacious idea at a time.